Now, we've been a believer is our philosophy today that the affirmative is looking at this in a completely myopic perspective. This is what they're doing with is just looking at now. But the extension of NATO has to do with things that will happen in the future. And what they're doing is they're closing the door forever. So we're going to be looking down at what I see from the keys that they presented to today. We're going to be seeing why they don't actually solve the problem and how, at the end of the day, this is a bad policy decision to make, and we should default to that as a status quo. Now, their first point was that NATO is expanding. And if you agree, NATO may be expanding. Now, their second point is that the U.S. supports it. But why exactly is the U.S. supporting it? Well, because NATO has a history of benefits. You can type that NATO has a history of benefits. And we have evidence to back this up from Dr. James W. Pearson from December 2007. He said that Snowden and Latvia contributed to the protection of the economically important area in the North. Polish and Lithuanian troops located in Europe's Scotland worked with law and order functions from military units to civilian agencies. Bulgaria and Romania found themselves involved in quite a different category of activities in the southern city of Princeton. They helped protect minority employees, fight in freedom of movement. Bulgarian engineers helped deactivate mines and unexploited ordnance in the same area. What this evidence is saying is how all these different countries that are in NATO came together and they all did different things that have impacted and have benefited what NATO is trying to do or what NATO's goals are. Now, in today's debate, we discuss this functioning as a negative theme of promoting democracy and security because these are the original goals of NATO. So we have asked judges to vote on the round based on this criteria. Whatever teams that are told about promoting democracy and security. With that, I would like to move on to my next point, which is basically their harm. Now, the first harm is terrorism. They said that countries are modernizing and selling old weapons to terrorists, especially in Afghanistan. And my first response to this is that NATO is not the problem. The problem is not that NATO is expanding or even modernization itself. The problem is the choice of the buyer. It's like saying that the fact that you're going to access to the building if those people who are donating are selling shady products in order to get money. See, the problem isn't with the charity, it's with the choice of the buyer. You see that NATO isn't the problem. NATO is not what's causing the modernization of these weapons. That their plan is not solved for this by stopping NATO expansion, and that's the major problem of the impact, is that it doesn't solve the problem of modernization. And my second response to this is that NATO expansion actually increases the fight against terrorism. And you can tap into this NATO fight terrorism. And this is from Dr. Renee D. Nevers, spring of 2007. It was a North Atlantic Treaty Organization's ongoing engagement in missions ranging from Bosnia to Darfur suggest that the alliance can overcome the doubt about institutions that have broken up to the Cold War. The war of terror that followed Al-Qaeda's attack on the United States on September 11, 2001 would appear further to reinforce NATO's significance. Experts agree that multi-power cooperation is essential in fighting terrorism. Moreover, several of NATO's current activities, such as missions in Afghanistan and in the Mediterranean, are closely linked to the war on terror, with other NATO missions also contributing to this fight. The BBC writes here this is evidence that NATO is actually fighting terrorism in Afghanistan. We see that the actual expansion of NATO would actually be increasing the fight against terrorism. So this directly conflicts with the point of these further teams. Now, the next one is that there's tension caused by NATO expansion, and they have two subpoints on this stuff. A was threatening, and B was pushing Russia away. Now, first, I would like to point out that the evidence that they brought up against us was from 1997. This is not adequate statistical evidence to show whether or not this is currently happening today or the Russians really feeling threatened by it. But I'm going to go ahead and respond to it anyway. My first response is that the alliance NATO itself was made to fight Russia. It was basically made to go against the Russian government. So and NATO relations are more significant than these drawbacks. Now, moving on to their next point. Their next point is that of time and. And actually, would like to point out that the affirmative team is time our hands forever. According to their mandate, what we're going to do is we're going to no longer let any former USSR or USSR allies into NATO. So this is to say that forever, after we pass our plan, we will no longer be accepted countries. This is an indefinite policy, meaning we can never take this back if we enact this plan. There is a myopic policy making decision that's irresponsible on the part of the affirmative, because we don't even know what the future lays ahead for us. One significant disadvantage to their own case. Now, my second response to this is that expansion will increase the ability to defend our nation. So expansion will increase the ability to defend our nation. And this we see like when we went in, when we had to help our fellow country ally Georgia. When that happened, we went on this by ourselves. And this cost us more money to go on this by ourselves, but we were still helping our allies. Now, just realize that if Georgia was a part of NATO, then we would have been able to have other NATO countries helping us, and this would have been more of a group effort. It would have cost us less money because this is a line of nations that we are with. So you see that it's actually an advantage to have NATO members in expansion. We see that the plan has significant disadvantages because we do not solve the underlying problem, and because we are increasing democracy and security currently, we ask to vote negative. Thank you. I now go to the cross-examination.
I'm Morgan. How are you doing?
I'm doing a great job.
First, a few quick questions for you. So, first of all, can someone buy something that was never sold?
No.
Okay, so you're going to do that when countries need to stop selling those things so those can't be bought back shares.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you would agree that may solve all the problems of these countries helping?
No, because if these countries are outside of NATO, they can still sell these weapons. And you have some of the countries trying to get into NATO are actually going to sell any weapons at all.
Okay. Now, do you refute the fact that history shows that when a country does join NATO, they actually do so?
You showed one example in 1997, which was adequate to for it.
1997. Okay. Let's move on. Now, let's say the city was put a stop sign on some corner because they wanted to help traffic out. Can they later come back and remove that stop sign if they find it inadequate?
It's not inadequate, but your plan does not allow that to happen because you don't have an actual timeline in your plan. So as you said in process before, we can assume that your plan is inadequate.
Okay, but all it can be revoked by future governments, correct?
Yes, but your policy, as you said in your conference before, is forever.
Okay. And we talked about fighting these terrorists. And you said that Russia is, or I'm sorry, NATO is in the process of fighting terrorists.
Yes.
And so to what extent are they fighting terror? How effective are they?
Yes. I read evidence about how they were in Afghanistan and the Mediterranean, they were fighting terror, and they had embarked on a war against it.
But how effective are they?
I don't have any evidence on it, I think, because that was one of their goals of stopping terrorism.
Thank you.